So one goal I had for this year is to become a little bit more interdisciplinary, to understand kind of the other aspects of cycling, not be so stuck in road. And cyclocross was on that list. I have access to a multi-time national cyclocross champion, a cyclocross commentator, very close friend, Jeremy Powers. He's going to give us a summary of the whole cyclocross season, the winners, the losers, the hypotheticals, and the big news coming up. There's a lot of good news that Jeremy's going to fill us all in on. And also just in general, like the world needs more of Jeremy Powers. The world deserves more of Jeremy Powers. So I'm going to provide that for you. You're welcome. Also, as a reminder, this is available on audio as well as video format. If you just want to listen to us, just going to be us talking at camera. The sponsor for this video is Create. These are creatine monohydrate gummies. Don't worry about all the big words. Creatine's kind of been bouncing around the conversation for a while now. I thought it was more for like the big muscly dudes, but in general, strength, recovery, and I am trying to keep what muscles I have as I get older. Creatine is a natural compound found in your muscles and brain. It helps the body produce energy by boosting ATP. It's stored as a phosphocreatine, that's not so bad, which helps recharge ATP during a workout. They'll overcomplicate creatine, but it's more about consistency of the timing. You don't have to load it. Research also shows it may support brain function. That can't hurt either. Don't mix it up with other big words. This is not a steroid. This is found in the body naturally. It's found in red meat. I've been using creatine before as a powder. I was putting it in my smoothie every day. But suddenly when you're traveling, there's a lot of powders all of a sudden with the electrolyte drink, the recovery drink. So the gummy form is super easy and convenient. I like the orange. That's my Florida showing. So if you've been thinking about creatine, this is a great way to start. Use my code Philip20 or the link in description. Thanks to Create for the sponsorship. Hey, Jeremy, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Phil?
Good. Great to see your face.
Better to see yours. Better to see yours.
All right, what do we got? You want to go through the races first and then kind of the news, the big picture stuff?
Sure. Yeah, there's all kinds of, I love cyclocross. So
yeah, a quick rundown of all the races that people need to know about that I may or may not have heard of.
Wait, didn't you go do a cyclocross race this year somewhere?
You're right. Does it count as a race if I was dressed in a bear suit?
I think it does.
That
yes,
was the thing. So yeah, it was the Big Bear cyclocross event. So that's all I know from cyclocross is that I wore a bear suit for a fundraiser for the local zoo. That didn't make it into cycling news. You missed that story?
It's weird. Yeah, it didn't make it into cycling news, but did you have fun? That's like the question always.
I had a great time. I came fit as a bear.
Seems like a cool race. Like I feel like I got to get the Big Bear.
Great times.
Yeah, and I remember when I raced up there as a junior, there was this place that had these amazing Big Bear pancakes. I don't know if that place still exists, but like it was a pancake that was like the size of all of our heads.
You went to Grizzly Manor. Grizzly Manor. Yeah,
dude, the biggest pancake.
That place is never going away.
Oh, thank God. Mm-hmm. I want to get my son, my daughter, my son, the fam out there because they would really like the size of these. Like they have these huge plates and everything. I don't know. I remember.
It's
great memories of this.
Yeah, the servers will like cuss at you. It's one of those kind of diners in a good way.
I love this. So I feel like that's a no-brainer. You got to hit the Big Bear cyclocross. You got to get the Big Bear.
Yeah,
pancake.
no, I'll get you. I'll get a whole itinerary for you. Come up.
Oh, dude. All right, go. Yeah, so cyclocross was good this year. I mean, there's always a lot of different series for anyone that's not familiar with cyclocross. Most of it's taking place over in Europe. There is like the USCX series, which is here in the United States and is really like a preseason event now. There's 4 different races all around the country. Some of the hitters show up, North American hitters. A couple Europeans come over, and I call it like preseason racing at this point because really like, early September in cyclocross is still considered like the preseason. When the World Championships are until February, you've got a long ways to go and a lot of races in between there to get there. But in Europe, it was still the UCI World Cup. We had the Super Prestige, and then you had the X2O Bodkammers Trophy, which basically is just like, I think X2O is like maybe a bathroom remodeling company or bathroom something. I don't know. Anyway, but they're the title sponsor, so it's great. But long story short, you've kind of got these other, we'll call them like televised crosses. And so you've got a whole bunch of hitters. If you win a televised cross or even podium a televised cross in Belgium or Netherlands or Europe in general, you're a hitter. You're a big dog. And then there's a bunch of
Can I zoom out? Sorry, can I back up? How come there's so many series? And what does each series mean? What's the most important one? There's no exclusivity. Like riders can do multiple series, right?
If you're a pro cyclocross racer, you're doing all the series, hopefully. And it kind of is one of those ones where it's like, if you're doing well, then you do you do that one, you take that one more seriously. So you start out the year and you get into the World Cup and, you win or you podium the first couple ones, or you're in the top 5. Well, then it's, maybe more of your focus for the year is going to be on like, hey, let's take the World Cup seriously, because there are a lot of events. A normal cyclocrosser is going to do around 30 events for a season. And so that's just about every day of every weekend, with sometimes midweek races. And during the Christmas period, there's like for 2 or 3 weeks, there's like a race every single day. So basically from 15th of December all the way till, I'd say like January 6th, maybe 7th, something like this. They race almost every day. It's like a little bit of a stage race, cyclocross stage race.
And they're all kind of equally important?
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends. Like if you win the X2O, you're amongst some like pretty elites. Even if you're in the top 3, if you win the Super Prestige, I want to say the Super Prestige is maybe like the oldest one, but the X2O, these are all organized by different groups of organizers. And, each of them is like, hey, this one's a little more professional here. This one's like got a better show over here. This one's got more start money for the fastest lap, or this one's got, something different going on. So each of them has like a little bit of a nuance to why I'd say winning the World Cup probably is, in my mind, the big dog of the series. But if you're a proper Belgian or, Dutch rider, then winning one of these other series is maybe even bigger potentially, because in the local papers and on television, the Super Prestige and the X2O really hold a lot of weight. So
paying for free to get if you win any of those as a Belgian.
No, true. But here's the thing. The World Cup, they really started to kind of look at like the big 3 men. So Van der Poel, Pidcock, they wanted to try to take those riders and put them into the end of the season. So like, hey, they know they're not going to start their season until December. So they wanted to try to get Wout van Aert, excuse me, I missed Wout. Wout van Aert, Matthew van der Poel, Tom Pidcock, all to be racing head to head. And the most likelihood of that was to get the season kind of kicked off somewhere like with the heaviest amount of points in the Christmas period. And actually this year, because van der Poel did so well and raced so many of them, he ended up taking the overall of the World Cup along with the world title. And so what do you win if you win the World Cup? Well, probably every World Cup you win is, I don't know, 5 to 10,000 euros. And then there's probably another 50,000 to win it or something like that. So not chump change. Van der Poel
probably enough for Van der Poel's Lamborghini.
I mean, to put the gas in it, right? So yeah. So I think there's definitely like, hey, if you win, he missed a handful of World Cups and still was able to defeat Thibaut Nace, which is a rider that I race with, Sven Nace's son, who is on Lidl Trek. So there's a lot of prestige in winning the World Cup overall. And I think personally for me, it's the most international. Like you see a lot of riders that qualify for the World Championships or federations that send riders there. So I feel like the World Cup for me is definitely would be the series that I would say is the most prestigious. But truthfully, if you're in the UCI World Cup, you're in the Super Prestige, you're in the X2O Bod Commerce, or you're in the Exact Cross Trophy or whatever it's called, the Exact Cross. That's also a televised series, although without accumulated points. You're a big dog if you are on TV and you're racing in one of those, because those are all like rare air to be up in the front of one of those.
Got it. All right. So who are the big winners and losers for this season?
Yeah, I mean, on the men's side, there's a lot of the similar names. You start to go through kind of like who. There's so many riders that people won't even, I guess, like know, so to speak. But Niels van der Putte, Matthew van der Poel, Wout van Aert, Thibaut Nace, young and up and coming rider Tibor Del Grosso was very, very strong this year. Joris Neuwenhuis, he came from, I believe he was on Cervelo test team. Anyways, he was a very strong rider on the road and came over to cyclocross a couple of years ago full time. Michael van Torenhout. Those are probably the big dogs, like on those, and those are mostly Dutch and Belgian riders. Then you've got riders like Felipe Orts, who is a Spanish rider, very, very strong. Cam Mason is British rider. He came out really, really good this year. So yeah, there's riders that have shown they've been brilliant. You know what I mean? Like really, really strong, but without consistency. But the consistent ones are the ones that are like almost every weekend fighting for the podium. And if truthfully, Van der Poel and Tibor Del Grosso coming into the season, Del Grosso is probably not a household name for like a cyclocross fan even, but if you've been following him for a long time, you know that he was under 23 world champion last year, and he's been like knocking on the door of some pretty big road races as well. He's got a huge engine, and I think is clearly heir apparent to the throne, to Van der Poel and to the top brass at Alpecin, because he's He has all the traits. He looks like Vanderpool. He rides as strong as he does, and he happens to be like 21 years old. So he's definitely going to be a name that people are going to be talking about both on the road and in cyclocross in years to come. And on the men's side, just to say the losers. Do you want me to go into the losers of the men's?
Yeah, no, losers are great. Look who you're talking to.
I think Eli Iserbyt, it's an unfortunate situation. He had to medically retire because of like a narrowed artery in his leg. He went through a lot of surgeries, was scheduled to come back, I believe, in November. Iserbyt ends up kind of out of the season, and he has to retire at 28. And that was like a generation of riders that sort of pushed my generation out. I'm 42 now. Iserbyt's 28. But when he came in, he and Lauren Sweck, who's another rider that I'm going to talk about, Vanderpool, Wout van Aert, they were coming in as like as the new generation, and they kind of ushered out the generation that I was in very quickly. They came in as young early 20s riders, and Vanderpool, I think at 19 won his first world title. So they were punching above their weight very early on. But we're starting to see kind of 10 years on, some of these riders having a lot more injuries and potentially a changing of the guard. Because when I start to talk about the Tibor Del Grossos, right, that to me is like, hey, this isn't now we're seeing like the 30-year-olds or getting close to 30, and we're starting to see these young 20-year-olds really come into their own. Even Cam Mason, there's a lot of other riders that are starting to kind of come up and start to scratch at the top there. But Eli, definitely one of the really sad stories of the year. Lawrence Sweck as well, a rider that I raced a lot against, 32 years old. Sweck like dislocated his shoulder, tore a bunch of stuff. So he had to end his season early. He was winning one of the series overalls and had to drop out. Like he's definitely been a force this year and kind of defying gravity, considering that he is, next year going to be at 33 years old racing cyclocross, and it's definitely a young man's game. And then you also hear about Vanderpool, while so dominant, taking his 8th world championship this year, which is historic. No rider's ever taken 8 world championships on the elite men's side. But at 31, he's saying like, hey, I might not do cyclocross anymore. So that'd be a real loss for the sport. But
so big picture for Vanderpool, a couple questions. One, is he in better form for cyclocross or road? Like when is he at his best during the season?
I think there's more demand for him on the road to be at his best.
That's what I thought. He doesn't, like Vanderpool at 90% is doing the cyclocross stuff and still dominant. And that also reflects with his team. Like he's getting paid for road. If you were to pie chart his value to his sponsors, his team, where he makes his money, what percentage of that is road versus cross?
Dude, I mean, on the road, it's all Tour de France, right? So if he was winning like he did last year at the Tour, that the value of that is so massive because of the global level of coverage. So I don't think anything can trump that. I think his road world title obviously was really big, when he won that.
Yeah.
These kinds of events, like there's no doubt that they're bigger than cyclocross.
So if he's at 31, he's like, okay, I'm no longer completely invincible. I'm looking at longevity for my career. Like now is when he kind of would have to pick one, is what we're thinking.
I think he's been the most multi-sport athlete. We saw him last year racing in the Mountain Bike World Cup as well. Really, although, I think he admitted that he was a little bit cooked. Like he never really got his like top form back, but he also had raced like a whole cyclocross season, won the world championships, had like an incredible classic season where he won multiple events. He like literally wore the yellow jersey for multiple days, lost it, took it back, like led the peloton at the Tour, finished the Tour, and then, decided like, hey, I'm going to take a swing at some mountain bike races to try to qualify for the Worlds. Like this is insane. Like that level is not normal. Like it's just, he's so like much above everybody else on what like they think is status quo. And, he still was in the top 5 of some of these mountain bike World Cups against riders that are racing literally 1/10 the amount of days that he is in a year. And so I just think that for him, at some point, you just got to pull the pin. Like you can't overwhelm your body like that, and you got to know when to call it. And yeah, he did. But I do think that there's still, he talks a lot about LA 28 and being in the mountain bike stuff there. So we'll talk about cyclocross Olympics as well, but there's still some stuff for him to check off on his bucket list. And I just think that
there's not much for him to win in cyclocross anymore.
There's just nothing for him to win. I mean, literally, like the man had 2 or 3 flat tires, I believe, at Mass Mechelen, which is a World Cup, maybe a week or 2 before the World Championships. And Del Grosso was on fire. So the teammate that I said is the young up-and-comer, Tibor Del Grosso, he was riding super strong. And Vanderpool, even with multiple flat tires, was able to come back to him. And although he only won by a handful of seconds, he's still like, in this way, undefeated even against great adversity. So,
right.
When you say like, hey, greatest of all time in this discipline, when you win the first world title at 19 and then you win your eighth one when you're
Right.
31,
Hard
it's
to
like, no one's going to do that for a very, very long time. The women's side is Lucinda Brand was the queen today of this year's season. I looked before we got on. She only fell out of the podium in one single race. It was a World Cup. It was a big race, and it was just like maybe 2 weeks before the World Champs. She also didn't win her national title, which went to Celine del Carmen Alvarado. It was surprising. I think she was so consistent all year. At 36 years old, though, like Brand is just in a whole nother stratosphere of consistency. Like she's really hit her stride. She just mentally, physically, she's very, very good, like week in and week out. I don't know that there's ever been a female rider that I've ever remembered that's been so dominant for so long. She didn't lose a race for a very long time in the season. But Puck Pieterse, who, was mountain bike world champion, she won a classic on the road last year, and won a stage at the Women's Tour de France the season before that. But between Puck Pieterse, Lucinda Brand, Celine del Carmen Alvarado, on the losers on that one, Zoe Bagstead got injured in a training crash early in the season. So she wasn't really like in the mix, but she would have been someone that would have definitely, I think, really been someone that got into it for sure. She would have been in the mix a lot and probably right up at the front. And then there were other more like cyclocross specific riders. Amandine Fuquene, I could be pronouncing that slightly off, so
That's okay. I'm not going to pronounce anything right.
Yeah, no, but maybe it's Fuquene, depending on who you're talking to. But she really came out this year and had, I think, a really impressive season. So she was on Arkea, so the women's Arkea team. They obviously went out of business and she needed a team. And I think just that like idea that she may need to retire or not have a team, she stepped it up. Like she was fierce. I mean, she was really like racing at the front, beating top riders, staying in the race longer than, I think others had expected. And she just wouldn't give up. So she ends up in the season as being like one of the real breakout stars. And then Aniek van Alphen also is a Dutch rider. She rides for the 777 team, which is another team that's owned by the Rudolphs. Van Alphen, I believe, won the Super Prestige. Don't quote me on that either. But she won one of the big series overall. Okay. I'm pretty sure 90% chance was the Super Prestige.
All right, I'll take it.
So yeah, she was really good this year. And that's a great show of consistency throughout the year. To win a series is like, those other series or any of the series, I think is like for the true crossers. You know what I mean? If you're a real cyclocross racer and you win a series overall, you can eat burgers and beers in the off season with a real smile on your face.
Got it. Okay, we're gonna do like little rapid fire questions here. If someone could watch one race from last season, what would you recommend? If someone's gonna go through and find like the full feed, which one would you watch?
Oh, why you put me on the spot like this? There were a lot of really good races.
You can narrow it down to 3.
No, I don't want to do 3. It was the first race back in Namur on the men's side. Van der Poel it was his first race back, and Thibaut Nace was extremely strong and only crashed in the last moments. But he really had Van der Poel under pressure. Van der Poel had come off what I understand to be like a long training block, a lot of volume, and didn't have the high intensity stuff yet. And there's always this kind of like anticipation of the big dogs coming back together, like Wout van Aert, Mathieu van der Poel, Thibaut Nace, like who can challenge for a win. And so Van der Poel comes back in and Thibaut really had him under pressure. He either flattered or had a small mistake. Sorry, I don't remember it vividly, but he didn't end up winning. But the race was really close head to head. And then there was another race. It wasn't a big race though. So basically Van der Poel come into it and he was of course, the favorite because he hadn't lost a race all year. I believe it was the Zilvermeer Cross. And Wout van Aert was very, very strong. It was like terrible conditions. You would have seen it was lots of snow and the temperature kind of changed really quickly. I don't even know if Van der Poel had gloves on, but basically like the race started out one condition with the potential of some snow, but it was a full blown, for Belgium, it was a full blown blizzard.
Okay.
But
yeah.
it looked like, maybe 3 weeks before the World Championships that at that time, Wout van Aert was going to challenge Van der Poel in these like really, really crappy conditions, very cold weather, wet, snow falling, really good course for Wout van Aert. And they were going head to head. And Van Aert had been distanced. Van der Poel had been distanced. They came back together. But then this is where Wout crashes on his knee and takes himself out. But the duel, the idea that this might have happened, there could have been a real like mental thing happening, but it was a great race.
Okay, I like it. When I want to watch cyclocross, if I'm going to pull on cyclocross, I want mud, I want snow, I want like at the end you can't see their face and the sponsors are all blacked out for
Yeah.
mud. That's what I'm talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. I mean, Vanderpool was hypothermic, like at the end, factually. So,
Perfect. Yeah.
this is the kind of like, so Exact Cross, Mole, Zilvermeer Cross, and then for sure Namur is always a good one. Also, one that's worth watching on the women's side that I have to say was just an absolutely phenomenal, like drag down, knockout, amazing race. You would have seen this on social where Puck Peterson, Ceylon Alvarado, and Lucinda Brand all consecutively crash in the downhill sandpit. Did you see this? Did this get fed to you?
Yep.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, so that was in the Cole. But yeah, a really great race that you definitely need to check out.
Okay. This might be the same answer. I'm going to ask it anyway. If you could watch a race, one race in person, if you could go in person, which race would it be? Now, probably that might change it. You don't want to stand there in the snowy slop. But if you could be on the sidelines in person, just watching.
That is the same race that I was just talking about as in Zonhoven. Is that how we would say it? But it's called Zonhoven. And that's the Cole. The Cole is like the downhill sandpit. That's got to be like one of the Super Bowls of cyclocross. And I also have to say, like in Namur, which is properly inside, like this year it was on the 15th or 14th of December. Namur is also just like classic cyclocross, right in the cursed period during that Christmas period.
Yep.
But truthfully, you can't go wrong with cyclocross. But yeah, I also really like Diegem. Diegem is a really great race, typically run at night, and is just a great vibe. Like all the bakeries stay open. It's at night. Like the YouTuber, like Crazy Rob or whatever, has like a cyclocross race during it. Anyways, I think Diegem's also just one, whether the racing is good or not. Although this year it was.
If you go, what's your experience? Where are you standing? What are you bringing with you?
You want to bring your friends because you're going to probably enjoy it. Like if you don't have like a Belgian Pils, then you're wrong. You would want to have like a Jupe, like a Jupiler, and you want to have like a little thing of Fritz with some mayo and some curried ketchup or whatever. And you want to like make sure you have your warm gloves on and your hat. This is going to be cold, but you just want to take the environment in. You'll probably smell some cigars. You'll smell like some Fritz and sausages in the air. And so like in the mornings, if you go out, you'll like have the bakery and the bread, but like, it depends on which race you're at. It's just, there's just a thing about cyclocross, like mud and fields and like cow manure and like all these different smells that I find to be like the best about what makes cyclocross what it is.
You really sold it. I'm in. Okay. That's perfect. All right. What are the riders saying that behind closed doors? What are we talking about that's not in the press?
It depends. I mean, can you imagine after the Zilvermeer cross, like what they were saying behind closed doors after they're hypothermic and things are so bad? I mean, yeah, I'm assuming that it's like, that was terrible. And like, I never want to ever put my leg over a bike again would be some of the things. The cyclocrossers are really lucky in that they don't really have to travel very far. So I think like when they're posed with like, hey, you need to go to, this kind of like island in Italy and do this nice race where it's going to be like 55 or 60 degrees and you're going to race in your short sleeves. They're like, that's too far. So behind doors, they're just like, they don't like to travel because it's twofold. One, there's just like a lot of intensity of travel during the season and so many races back to back that like traveling just isn't that much fun because you're just tired the whole time. But if you're from the United States or you're from far away and going to like a beautiful place like Italy to race, it's like, what are you talking about? This is amazing. But I think for the hardcore Europeans,
because road is so globalized, part of the charm, if you're, Vanderpool, is you can sleep in your own bed for most of these races.
Correct.
So that he's like, oh, putting a race in the US, I'm out.
No way. Not even taking a look at that. So yeah, I don't.
They'll come here for golf.
But yeah, so behind closed doors, they're like, hey, we're not traveling and we got like life is good,
Fair enough.
I think that's what they're saying.
Okay. Armchair race organizer. What would you change about an event, a series, a course? More sand traps, less jumps, more live bears on course?
I think there's an opportunity. Like cycling in general is like steeped in a lot of tradition. And that's great to some extent. I'm a purist in a lot of ways, especially as I get older. I'm like, oh man, like I like, they changed at one time as a cyclocross rider, you could have different width tires, like 35 millimeter or 30 to 35. And now it's just capped at 33. Like no one can get, and they were basically the reason for that is like, hey, if everyone just is going to move to 33, then now like people that are traveling over don't need to bring so many different sets of wheels. And, that's a great rule because in this way, for me, it saved me, $600 every time we would travel because I'd have to bring 2 extra
Right.
bike bags full of 35 wheels or whatever, because equipment is a thing in cyclocross and it's already an expensive sport to travel to and to get to. But I would love to see some modernization of the sport. I think that there is sports, to be honest, as a guy that's seen a lot of different types of sports, from golf to tennis to, rugby and European football and soccer, whatever. Like, there are cooler sports to do now. And so I would like to see, I mean, I'm a purist. I love cyclocross. I got a whole rack of cyclocross bikes behind me. But I just think that there could be some things that would modernize it. And getting into those is probably not this episode, but just like, I'm not saying like have an alligator pit and like, snakes around your
Yeah.
neck at the start, but like somewhere between there and where we are would be cool. I feel like
It's
there's
the same on the road. I have the same thing with the road as part of the, if you try to explain the Tour de France to an alien or someone who's not watched it, they're lost, they're confused. There's a lot of stuff that just
Right.
like seems antiquated and brutal, but that's also what we like about it. Like there's stuff holding it back, but that's also a lot of the charm. So I'm not surprised that cyclocross echoes that.
I also think about like, Shaun White in these sort of like athlete owned models and, this kind of thing, like what's going on with his snow league is really cool. Like he's got, the athletes are invested in it. And at this point, when you're talking about these smaller sports that, have a certain, it takes a long time to get to the top of, and then you're the person that's, male or female, that's the best. Well, then, you're building the thing. You're like the top of the castle. Like you should be getting like, yes, there's prize money. Of course there is, but maybe there's an ownership model for one of the series that really could make a lot of sense and could drive a lot more value. And, they have a seat at the table. We're seeing these athlete leagues pop up, especially in North America, but I think globally. So who knows? Maybe there's an opportunity for something like that in the future with like an athlete owned series that starts out small, but gains traction and popularity.
Okay. Yeah. Good luck with the UCI not just absolutely having you killed before that gets going.
No, but they have their thing. They have the World Cup, and they're like,
Okay.
The thing is like what is this saying? Like, the tide,
A rising tide lifts all boats.
There you go. That one.
What I guess the echo that I heard was just like, there's a lot of road tries to own a lot of their stuff. So there's like the Hammer series, which all the road teams are really into for 5 minutes. And then it's just, you're not going to go up against the Tour de France if you're the Hammer series, no matter how hard the teams want it to. I'm guessing that just goes everywhere.
Yeah. And look, and I think the thing that you're up against with anything that changes is the calendar. The calendar's stacked and there's a lot of history, with those series. So they're not going to just jump out of those. But
Vanderpool's doing just fine on the current calendar with his Lambos and PJs.
Correct. But I also think that like with the right opportunity, Vanderpool's also like, he doesn't care if he wins the World Cup because he's already won everything. So I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah. If you started a league in Dubai and paid Vanderpool enough dollars, he'd live in Dubai for a while.
Dude, we used to go over and race the Cyclocross Tokyo race, which was at the end of the season.
Heck yeah.
And man, that was such an awesome event. Shout out to the guys that put that on, to the team that put that on. Yeah, I always think about that. Like, man, cyclocross just could be so much more international with, the Japanese riders that come over and still race today, and their interest in it and building the public or the fan base up globally. This is a lot to do, I still think, with cyclocross. And I think it's a really cool sport. I obviously love it. It's been my passion for a very long time, but I still think that, if it, especially, I know we're going to talk about this at some point, but like if it were to go to the Olympics,
let's do
how that could really like change the scope of the sport in general.
So what's the current buzz on the Olympics? What would it take? What are the ins and outs?
I don't know. I mean, I had heard really good things, really positive things. Then I heard some people that were shareholders in the current Winter Olympic sports were not psyched on it. Like they didn't want it to come in or whatever. Or
is it sport in, sport out? If a cross comes in, there's something else is getting squeezed?
I mean, there's obviously at the Olympics, there's a lot of politics, right? Like, I don't know all the politics that are going on, but like there are for sure a lot. I think red tape that I've heard is that it has to be held completely on snow. So like this is like a thing. But truthfully, like if we look at, this race that I was talking about, the exact cross race, there was full blown snow. And then they've been racing up in Val di Sole in Italy on a completely snow covered track, 100% snow, nothing like except for the pavement really. Like it's full blown snow. So I guess you can race cyclocross in the snow, although why not have like some snow and some mud and some things like
there's not a Winter Olympic sport that's not exclusively on ice or snow.
Supposedly not, but I think this year they're starting to get a little bit more lenient. Like I know like cross country running is coming in. I don't know if those are going to be like exclusively run on snow. I have to be honest, I'm not like reading about it every day, but
They're
from
going to
what
be
I understand,
negotiating, like we can have 20% mud, 80% snow. Like that's going to be the conversation.
Totally. And I think,
Interesting.
but I just think in general, if you're talking about, the riders that could come off of road and mountain bike and come in and look at potentially taking a medal in cycling in the winter, hey, man, this is a really great opportunity. I don't see any reason and I'm looking at this strictly from a cycling. I'm not worried about ski mountaineering or cross country running or anything, but just like
No.
very selfishly about cycling, this would be huge for the sport. It would definitely globalize it. And for these countries that are sort of dominating right now, like the Netherlands and Belgium in particular, and even France to some degree, has got a lot of strong riders in their talent pool for programs in like UK, Ireland, Italy, United States, Canada, Japan, right? Of other countries, a lot more resources are going into Olympic programs. And you've heard this 1,000 times, but those riders that right now in the United States, the Chris Blevins, right? The AJ August, or
Right.
over on the women's side, like I start to think about riders like Evie Richards, riders that have done cyclocross. I'm not just picking these
Sure.
out, but like Evie Richards has won a World Cup as a female, like as one of the youngest that ever did it, I believe, like at maybe 2021, very hard one in Namur, in fact. And like Blevins has not really raced at the World Cup level in cyclocross, but it'll be after the LA 28 games. This could be a great focus for him. Van der Poel would still be like kind of on his like end of his run, but he'd still obviously be very strong if he was at 35 or whatever, 36 when this rolled around. So Van der Poel is potentially in the mix still.
That would give him a reason to shift away from road and back into
Come back.
what I bet if you asked him, I bet he enjoyed cyclocross more than road.
I think he's just really good at it.
Yeah, I think he's good at all of it, but I think he's followed the money into road, which is a lot of that's the story with a lot of cyclocross guys. The real cash is in road. But I bet like 5 years from now, and he's all right on cash, he can do whatever he wants. I could see him going for Olympics.
It would do a lot for the sport. And I think right now there's just a lot of attention on gravel. You know what I mean? There's a lot of attention on gravel, which I like gravel. I think it's cool. I was riding gravel roads in 06, 07. Like I've always been riding. You've been here. We've ridden gravel. Like
you and I were riding gravel together when it was called dirt.
Yeah, exactly. Like we were like, can we get 25C Kenda, like ultra thick iron cap tires with Thornproof
big gravel
tubes
day.
not
Let's put on
flat,
the 25Cs and keep it as low as 80 psi
and rattle our teeth out of our head. But like I'm into gravel. I just think that there's room for everything. But the industry's got to be able to support it to some degree, one. And then two, I just feel like there's a lot of R&D that can go back into cyclocross. As an Olympic sport, there's just a lot that would go into it because truthfully, when you start talking about winning a medal at the Olympics, a lot more people are interested. That's on everyone. If you're an athlete, that's on everyone's bucket list.
So the bike brands have followed the cash also, and they're designing bikes for gravel. Who's making a bike specific for cyclocross now?
There are a lot of brands that are still making them. I mean, Trek makes them, Specialized makes them. Like there's still cyclocross specific bikes, but there's also kind of these crossovers. Like Orbea has a Terra, which is kind of like in the middle. You know what I mean? It's like it's not as aggressive as a Ridley would be, which is a pure cyclocross machine. But it's also not as like lax as whatever the big gravel bike is. And so there's like this kind of in the middle thing that's going on too, where you see some people racing these bikes. But I've heard, Orbea is going to develop a cyclocross bike, for example, like that's the rumor mill. Who knows? But I just think that bike manufacturers can make bikes, and cyclocross would just become a lot more popular. Whereas I see like ski mountaineering is in the Olympics. I've been doing skimo for the last like 3-4 years, introduced to me by, I believe, Tim Johnson. I don't know. Somebody introduced me to it. And, I was thinking like, oh, I want to go out there and like do some XC skiing or whatever and bop around. No way. Skimo is so much cooler. In fact, after the Olympics, I expect to see skimo just kind of go like this because people are going to be like, I'm going to do that. You know what I mean? I can walk uphill on my skis. Exactly. So I think that cyclocross, it could really benefit from this. Whereas like gravel, I just don't see it having an opportunity outside of like a world championship. I don't really see it going into an Olympic category because we've already got road and mountain bike. Like those are hammers. I just don't see gravel going into the Olympics. Cyclocross going into the winter games, when like winter games are good, but I think they'd be improved, and I think the sport would be overall better. So huge opportunity there. And
it's interesting.
It would make me, I'd literally die happy, man, if the cyclocross went into the Olympics. It would be so cool.
I'm obviously going to agree with you. To me, like regardless of whether there's snow on the ground, cyclocross is an inherently winter sport. No one's doing it in the summer. There's also, if I'm the Olympics, I'm looking at, it's very watchable. It's pretty simple to see what's going on. It's not like road, which is sort of on the complicated side. It's fun to watch. It's a good scene. It's, it's a good length, and there's good star power. Like compared to these other sports, if you're for sure the Olympics are doing the math on who's going to watch it, people are going to watch it, and what the A-list people are. And I'm sure that Matthew Vanderpool has a more loyal following that's going to tune in for him than whoever's going to gold schemo and a lot of these events. And that's why they brought in the X Games style stuff. They brought in the sort of fun action things because they're watchable, right? It's just IOC is just they're coin operated. So yeah, fingers crossed. I like the sound of that. You've sold me.
Good. That's what I like. I think it would revitalize some of the downward, like cyclocross definitely peaked and it's been down. I mean, even in Europe, not necessarily with regards to like European race attendance, but I think with regards to like the talent pool and riders being able to make a living and things like this, it starts to get really, really lean. And, that's fragile. You want to see it be healthier. And so I think the Olympics would be a really, really great way to inject a lot of health and a lot of more like longevity and the ability to like see a career potentially and the ability to earn a living, outside of the 10 athletes on the men's and women's side that are probably doing it really well right now. You need to have it be deeper than that for it to be like a full-blown international sport. It's been there before. Mountain biking also died and came back. Like when I was in mountain biking in the early 2000s, it was dead. I couldn't even, I couldn't get a deal at all. I had to go to the road. And then I ended up, that's how I met you, which I guess is great. but
everything went downhill. All right, the last question, just to end it. What do you wish people would know about cyclocross that they don't?
Well, I mean, I think from the outside looking in, it's really like if you're looking at cycling in general, especially on the road, right? A lot of people that are following you, it's a very individual sport. There's not really a lot of team tactics involved. And it comes back to a lot of these riders, are splitting like a mixed discipline. So they're, having success on the road, they're having success in mountain bike, and then they come into cyclocross as sort of this, we get these great duels, these great head-to-heads. Cyclocross is one, really off of seconds. Like you're not going to win a cyclocross race unless you're one of the greats by a minute. Go as hard as you can, wait for a mistake, and then capitalize off that mistake. But I think it's just a very individual sport. And so there's a lot of great storytelling when you start to get into, the individual nature of like needing to kind of hold this, this pressure of winning on your back or competing at your best. And yeah, I don't know. It's just a very traditional old school cycling sport. One that isn't just like in your case, right? You need to be like very good power to weight. You need to put out some big watts. You need to eat a lot of carbohydrate. Like you got to do some miles and some base miles to be really good at even what you're up to, just like what you did in Hawaii and, and on the road, you really need to do that. In cyclocross, it takes like a lot of different types of skills. It's very short. It's usually won based on someone else making a mistake. It's like really can be like pretty treacherous and nasty conditions, both like physically and tactically and technically. So I don't know. I always think about it like chess and checkers. You know what I mean?
I think it's a lot more athletic than road. Like road it's power to weight. You can be a twig and still be good, but it's more physical. It's more around. It's also more potential for injury, stuff like that. What I liked about cyclocross from the outside looking in, like what I always wished I lived in a place that had more of it or had an opportunity for it, was I guess as a spectator, just it's concentrated, it's more fun to watch. A road race takes all day and the middle 3 hours are a snooze fest. And cyclocross, something can happen. Same as track. Like track racing, you look away, somebody's lapped the field. It's just a different beast. And cyclocross, like anything could happen any moment. And then for the other side, like community, if you could speak to that a little bit. I just feel like the scene and the showing up and the people, kind of the beer feeds, the costumes. I just feel like cyclocross looks like a blast.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think if you go over with your friends and, you go and watch some races during the Christmas period and you like go there, you go to the World Championships. Yeah, I mean, I got to watch Wout van Aert and Mathieu van der Poel race head to head in Hoogerheide a couple years ago. I was there on behalf of Eurosport and I was doing like on the side commentary. It was like two gladiators in a bowl. There were the crowd, you knew where the riders were because they were just cheering as they went through. So I never needed to like think, oh, where are they on the track? Because I could just like listen with my ear to know, hey, they're down in that lower part. It was a real like head-to-head battle, like all the way down. Van der Poel jumped the barriers, but then lit it up in the sprint and won in the final against like Hoogerheide is named, the original World Cup is named after his dad, Audrey van der Poel, who was also cyclocross world champion. I don't know. It's you go with your friends, you know you're going to have like, well, even if you don't drink, you're going to have some fritz or some food and you're going to enjoy it. Your boots are going to be muddy and you're going to get to be so close to the action and you're going to get to find a part of the track where you can like literally smell the riders come by. They're going to go by so quickly. And then you got to find a spot where there's like a TV monitor so you can, eat your snack and watch your race and then have them come by but it's typically every 6 to 8 minutes they come by again, and you get to see them, 6 to 8 times. So it's beautiful. It's a good way to spectate cycling.
Yeah. No, they put on a good show. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, buddy. Great hang.
Hey, it was a pleasure. Thank you for
Beautiful.
having me on, and it's always good to jam cyclocross with you. So thanks
Yeah.
for having me. I
Love it.
missed it this year. I typically commentate the cross races, but this year I didn't commentate, and I missed talking about the cyclocross.
And now we
but
got out of your
still-
systems. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. I was able to get on the system. So thanks for the opportunity.
Perfect.